The moment Natalie Torres realized her 12-foot sailboat was taking on water faster than she could bail it out, she understood with crystalline clarity that she was going to die alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. She had been out for 3 days, attempting what her friends had called a foolish journey and what she had called necessary. After her engagement fell apart 6 months ago when she discovered her fiancé had been embezzling from the nonprofit she had spent 5 years building from nothing, Natalie needed to prove to herself that she could still trust her own judgment. She needed to feel capable again. The solo sailing trip from San Diego down the Baja coast was supposed to be that proof. Instead, the unexpected storm 2 nights ago had damaged her boat more severely than she had initially assessed. The radio was dead. Her emergency beacon had been swept overboard by a rogue wave. Her phone had no signal and was down to 3% battery. The hand pump she had been using to clear water from the hull had just cracked in half. Natalie sat in 6 inches of cold seawater, her dark hair plastered to her face, her hands bleeding from rope burn and blistering, and felt the boat settling lower. She was 28 years old, and this was how her story would end. She thought about her mother, who had died when Natalie was 16. She thought about her father, who would blame himself even though none of this was his fault. She thought about all the children her nonprofit had helped, providing art supplies and programs to underfunded schools throughout Southern California. She wondered who would take over her work. The boat lurched, and Natalie grabbed the mast to steady herself. Water was now at her knees. She had maybe an hour before the vessel went under completely. She had read enough survival stories to know that staying with the boat was usually the best option, but there would be nothing to stay with soon. She closed her eyes and tried to remember a prayer her mother used to say, something about protection and grace. The words would not come. Instead, she found herself simply whispering, "I'm not ready. Please, I'm not ready." When she opened her eyes, she saw it. At first, Natalie thought it was a hallucination, some cruel trick her desperate mind was playing. But as she blinked away the salt spray and focused, she realized the massive white shape on the horizon was real. A yacht. Not just any yacht, but the kind of vessel that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about how the extremely wealthy spent their summers. Natalie lunged for her emergency flare kit, praying the waterproof container had lived up to its name. Her fingers fumbled with the latch. The boat dipped again, and she had to grab the mast with one hand while working the container with the other. Finally, it opened. She pulled out a flare, aimed it skyward, and fired. The bright red streak arced into the gray sky, a declaration of desperation against the clouds. Natalie fired another, then another, using all 3 of her remaining flares. She watched the yacht, trying to determine if it was getting closer or moving away. For 5 agonizing minutes, nothing seemed to change. Then she saw the yacht beginning to turn. They had seen her. Natalie started crying, big, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. The boat was almost completely underwater now, only the highest parts of the deck still above the waterline. She held onto the mast and waited, watching the yacht grow larger as it approached. The vessel was even more impressive up close. Gleaming white hull, at least 150 feet long, with multiple decks and what looked like a helicopter pad. As it pulled alongside her sinking boat, Natalie saw crew members rushing to the railing, lowering a ladder and preparing rescue equipment. A man appeared at the railing, tall and dark-haired, wearing clothes too expensive to be anywhere near ocean spray. He was not in uniform like the others. His eyes locked on her with an intensity that made Natalie forget for a moment that she was sinking. "Can you climb?" he called down. Natalie looked at the ladder. Her boat was so low in the water now that the distance was not as far as it could have been. She nodded. "I've got you," the man said. "Just start moving." She let go of the mast and reached for the ladder. Her hands could barely grip the metal rungs, too cold and damaged to close properly. She got one foot on the bottom rung, then pulled herself up. Pain shot through her palms. She climbed another rung, then another. The sailboat chose that moment to make its final surrender to the ocean. Natalie felt it drop away beneath her, and she dangled from the ladder with her feet over nothing but water and the sinking deck. She tried to pull herself up, but her hands were not cooperating. Then strong hands gripped her wrists. The dark-haired man had climbed down the ladder. He was right above her, his gray eyes steady and calm. "I've got you," he repeated. "Let me take your weight." She did not have much choice. Her hands were failing. He pulled her up, one rung at a time, with a strength that seemed effortless. Other crew members reached down as they neared the top, helping to lift her over the railing and onto the deck. Natalie collapsed the moment her feet hit solid ground. The world tilted and spun. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else pressed a bottle of water into her hand. The dark-haired man knelt beside her. Up close, Natalie could see he was probably in his early 30s, with sharp features that belonged on a movie screen and a presence that commanded attention without effort. "You're safe now," he said. His voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that made you believe what it told you. "My name is James Anderson. This is my yacht. You're safe." "Natalie," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Natalie Torres. Let's get you inside, Natalie Torres. My crew will take care of you." A woman in a crisp white uniform helped Natalie to her feet and guided her through glass doors into a luxurious interior that looked like something from a five-star hotel. Rich wood paneling, cream leather furniture, soft lighting that did not hurt her salt-burned eyes. The crew member, who introduced herself as Sarah, led Natalie to a cabin with a bathroom that featured a shower larger than the entire sleeping area on her sunken sailboat. Sarah laid out fresh clothes and towels, explained how everything worked, and told Natalie to take all the time she needed. The moment Natalie was alone, she turned on the shower and stepped under the hot water fully clothed, letting it wash away the salt and fear and exhaustion. She watched the water at her feet turn gray with grime. Eventually, she removed her ruined clothing and actually bathed, finding expensive soap and shampoo that smelled like lavender and honey. When she finally emerged, wrapped in the softest robe she had ever touched, she found the clothes Sarah had left. Yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, both in her size, both probably worth more than her monthly rent. There were even fresh undergarments still in packages. Natalie dressed and examined herself in the mirror. Her face was sunburned and wind-chapped, her eyes bloodshot, her lips cracked. But she was alive. That had to count for something. A knock on the door made her turn. Sarah entered with a first aid kit and a gentle smile. "Let me look at your hands," she said. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah cleaned and bandaged Natalie's palms with professional efficiency. The medical supplies were top tier, and Sarah clearly had training. As she worked, she explained that Natalie was on the Persephone, a privately owned yacht currently on a journey from Los Angeles to Costa Rica. They were about 200 miles off the Baja coast. "You were lucky Mr. Anderson was on deck when you fired those flares," Sarah said. "He has a thing about watching the water, spends hours just standing at the railing looking out. He saw your first flare immediately." "Is he the captain?" Natalie asked. Sarah smiled in a way that suggested Natalie had said something amusing. "Mr. Anderson owns the Persephone. He's a businessman. I probably shouldn't say more than that. A businessman wealthy enough to own a yacht like this." Natalie did some quick mental math about what a vessel this size might cost and felt dizzy all over again. "He wants to know if you feel well enough to join him for dinner," Sarah continued. But if you need to rest, he completely understands. Natalie was exhausted to her bones, but she was also starving, and the thought of being alone in the cabin made her anxious. Out there, she would be with people. She would be reminded that she was no longer sinking. I can do dinner, she said. Sarah led her through corridors and up a flight of stairs to a dining room that took Natalie's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the ocean, now calm and glittering in the late afternoon sun. A table was set for two, with candles and fine china. James Anderson stood by the windows, his hands in the pockets of his dark slacks, his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He turned when they entered, and Natalie saw something flash across his face that she could not quite name. "Natalie," he said, "you look much better." "I feel human again," she replied. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life." He gestured to the table. "Please sit. You must be hungry." Sarah withdrew silently, and Natalie took a seat. James sat across from her. A steward appeared immediately with wine, which Natalie declined in favor of more water, and then soup in shallow bowls, some kind of seafood bisque that tasted like heaven. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. Natalie was too focused on food to care about conversation, and James seemed content to let her eat. But eventually, her initial desperation faded, and she looked up to find him watching her with those steady gray eyes. "I should probably explain what I was doing out there," she said. "You don't owe me an explanation. I feel like I do. It was stupid going out alone like that." James set down his spoon. "Was it a suicide attempt?" "What? No. God, no." Natalie shook her head emphatically. "I'm a pretty experienced sailor. I've been doing it since I was a kid. I just wanted some time alone to think, to prove to myself that I could handle something difficult. I checked the weather. That storm was not supposed to happen." "The ocean doesn't care what's supposed to happen," James said, but his tone was not unkind. "I'm glad you're experienced. That's probably why you're still alive. Someone with less skill would have panicked." "Oh, I panicked," Natalie admitted. "I just panicked while also doing the practical things." That earned her a small smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger and more approachable. "Tell me about your life, Natalie Torres," he said. "What do you do when you're not attempting solo sailing trips?" She told him about her nonprofit, about the art programs she ran in schools that had cut their arts funding. She talked about the murals they had painted, the after-school classes, the supplies they distributed. She did not mean to talk for as long as she did, but he asked questions that showed he was genuinely listening. And before she knew it, the soup bowls had been replaced with fish and vegetables, and she was telling him about the 7-year-old who had discovered a love for sculpture. "And you fund this how?" James asked. "Grants mostly, some private donations. We do fundraisers a few times a year. It's always tight, but we make it work." "That's incredible work. Important work." Natalie shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It matters to me. Art mattered to me when I was a kid. It was the only thing that made sense after my mom died. I want other kids to have that." James was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he asked, "Is that what you needed to think about? Your nonprofit?" "Partly," Natalie admitted. She hesitated, then decided she might as well be honest. This man had saved her life. She could give him the truth. "I found out 6 months ago that my fiancé was stealing from the organization. He had access to our accounts because I trusted him. He took almost $40,000 over the course of a year. We pressed charges, but the money's gone. He spent it, and I just kept thinking that I should have seen it, I should have known." "That's not on you," James said firmly. "That's on him. I know that intellectually, but emotionally. I felt like I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore, so I decided to do something that required me to trust myself completely. Solo sailing seemed like the answer. She laughed, a bitter sound. Turns out I can't trust my judgment about that either. You're alive, James pointed out. You kept yourself alive in a storm on a damaged boat for days. You fired flares at the exact right moment. You trusted yourself enough to survive. That counts. Natalie felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She took a sip of water to cover it. They talked through the rest of dinner, the conversation flowing more easily than Natalie would have expected. James told her about growing up in Seattle, about his love for the ocean, about learning to sail on the Puget Sound. He did not talk about his work, and Natalie did not push. It seemed like an unspoken agreement. They were just two people sharing a meal, not a billionaire and the woman he had rescued. After dinner, James offered to show her the deck. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible. They stood at the railing, watching the light play across the water. "We'll reach Los Cabos tomorrow," James said. "We can arrange to get you home from there, whatever you need." "I don't even know what I need yet," Natalie admitted. "I lost everything on that boat, my wallet, my phone, my laptop." "Everything? We'll handle it. I have people who can help with documentation, credit cards, all of it. Don't worry about the logistics." Natalie looked at him, at his profile against the sunset. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He turned to meet her gaze. "Why wouldn't I be?" "You know what I mean. You could have just dropped me at the nearest port and been done with it. Instead, you're giving me dinner and clothes and offering to help with everything else." James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. 5 years ago, my sister went sailing with her husband. Experienced sailors, both of them. Good boat, good weather. Something went wrong, we don't know what, they were just gone. We searched for 3 weeks, never found them. "Oh God," Natalie breathed. "I'm so sorry." "When I saw your flares today, I thought about Emma. I thought about how much I wished someone had been there to see her flares if she fired any. How much I wished someone had pulled her out of the water. I can't save my sister, but I could save you, so I did. And now I'm going to make sure you're okay, because that's what I would have wanted someone to do for Emma." Natalie reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the railing. His skin was warm, and she felt him tense for a moment before relaxing. "Thank you," she said simply. They stood there as the sun disappeared and the stars began to emerge, neither of them moving away. That night, Natalie slept deeply and dreamlessly in the comfortable cabin. She woke to morning light streaming through the windows and the sound of gulls, which meant they must be close to land. She dressed in more borrowed clothes and ventured out to find breakfast. The dining room was empty except for one crew member who directed her to a buffet of fresh fruit, pastries, and made-to-order eggs. Natalie filled a plate and ate by the windows, watching the coastline grow closer. James found her there an hour later. He looked different in daylight, wearing jeans and a simple gray shirt, his hair slightly tousled. "We'll dock in about 2 hours," he said, taking a seat across from her with his own coffee. "I've had my assistant make some calls. There's a U.S. consulate office in Cabo where we can get you emergency documentation. I've also arranged for a replacement phone and credit card to be waiting at the office. You'll need to make some calls to cancel your old cards and verify your identity, but we can handle most of it." Natalie stared at him. "How did you do all that overnight?" "I made some calls. I know people. You must know very powerful people." James gave her that small smile again. "I might. Are you going to tell me what you actually do for a living?" He considered her for a moment. "I run a company called Anderson Maritime Industries. We design and build commercial ships, oil platforms, deep-sea exploration equipment, that kind of thing." Natalie's eyes widened. Even she had heard of Anderson Maritime. It was one of the largest marine engineering firms in the world, which meant James Anderson was not just wealthy, he was billionaire wealthy. "Oh," she said. "Does that change things?" he asked, watching her carefully. "Should it? Some people think so." Natalie thought about it. "You're still the person who climbed down a ladder to pull me up. The money doesn't change that." Something in his expression shifted, softened. "Good answer." They docked in Los Cabos at noon. James accompanied Natalie to the consulate office, where his assistant had indeed worked miracles. Within 2 hours, Natalie had emergency documents, a new phone, and temporary access to her bank account. James waited patiently through all of it, making calls of his own, occasionally appearing with coffee or water. When they were finally finished, Natalie stood on the street outside the office and realized she had no idea what to do next. She could book a flight home. She should book a flight home, but the thought made her feel strangely hollow. "Come back to the yacht," James said, reading her hesitation. "We're staying docked here for a few days while the crew does some maintenance. You don't need to rush off. I should get home. I have work to do. Do you? Or do you have emails that can wait another few days?" Natalie pulled out her new phone and scrolled through her messages. Her assistant director had sent several updates, all of which indicated that things were running smoothly without her. Her father had sent worried texts, which she immediately answered to let him know she was safe. Beyond that, nothing urgent. "I can't just impose on you," she said. "You're not imposing, I'm inviting. There's a difference." James stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You came out here to think, to figure things out. You didn't get to finish that. Stay a few more days. Think, figure things out, no pressure, no obligations, just time." Natalie looked up at him, at the genuine offer in his eyes. Against all logic, she wanted to stay. She wanted more time in this strange bubble where she was just Natalie and he was just James, where money and work and obligations did not matter. "Okay," she said. "A few more days." The next 3 days passed in a kind of dream. James showed her Los Cabos, the places tourists never saw. They went to a tiny restaurant in the hills where the owner greeted James like family and served them fish tacos that made Natalie actually moan with pleasure. They walked through markets and along beaches, talking about everything and nothing. James was easy to be with. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and had a dry sense of humor that caught Natalie off guard. He told her about his work, about the challenge of running a company his grandfather had founded, about the pressure of living up to a legacy. She told him about her childhood, about her mother's death, about building something from nothing. They did not touch beyond the occasional brush of hands or shoulder, but Natalie was constantly aware of him. The way he moved, the way he looked at her, the way he seemed to relax when they were together. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not read, but that made her heart race. On the 3rd night, they had dinner on the yacht's deck under the stars. The crew had set up a table with candles and fairy lights, and someone had arranged flowers in a crystal vase. It felt like a date, though neither of them said so. "I've been thinking," James said over dessert, some kind of chocolate mousse that melted on the tongue, "about your nonprofit. What about it? You said funding is always tight, that you lost $40,000. I'd like to make a donation to help cover that loss and provide some operational cushion." Natalie's chest tightened. "James, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, I want to. What you do matters. Let me help." "How much are we talking about?" $500,000. Natalie nearly choked on her mousse. "I'm sorry, what? $500,000. That should cover the loss and give you enough to expand your programs, maybe hire another staff member, not worry so much about monthly expenses." "That's insane. That's too much." "It's nothing to me," James said simply, "but it's everything to those kids you help. Take the money, Natalie." She stared at him, her mind reeling. $500,000 would change everything for her organization. They could reach twice as many schools, provide scholarships, create a permanent fund. But taking money from James felt complicated in ways she could not quite articulate. "Why?" she asked. "And don't tell me it's because of Emma. This is about more than that." James set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Because in 3 days you've become important to me, because I admire what you do and who you are, because I can help and I want to help. Is that honest enough?" "I've become important to you," Natalie repeated slowly. "Yes." "James, I barely know you. I know. But sometimes you meet someone and you just know they matter. You feel that way too, I can see it." He was right, and that terrified her. She had felt more connected to James in 3 days than she had felt to her ex-fiancé in 2 years. But her ex had also seemed wonderful at first, before the stealing and the lies. Could she trust her judgment about James? "I need to think about it," she said. "The donation, all of it." "Fair enough," James replied, though something flickered in his eyes that might have been disappointment. That night, Natalie lay in her cabin and stared at the ceiling, trying to organize her thoughts. In less than a week, her entire life had been upended. She had nearly died. She had been saved by a man who seemed too good to be true. She was feeling things she had sworn she would not let herself feel again. The smart thing would be to go home, to put distance between herself and James, to thank him politely and move on with her life. The smart thing would be to not accept his money and definitely not to explore whatever this was between them. But Natalie was tired of doing the smart thing. Doing the smart thing had still gotten her engaged to a thief. Maybe it was time to take a risk. She got up and pulled on a robe, then slipped out of her cabin. The yacht was quiet, most of the crew asleep. She made her way to the upper deck, where she had spent that first sunset with James. He was there. Of course he was there, standing at the railing in the darkness, looking out at the water. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning around. "How did you know it was me?" "I hoped it would be." Natalie moved to stand beside him. The ocean was black and vast, sprinkled with reflected starlight. She could hear the water lapping against the hull. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what? Of this? Of you? Of how fast this feels?" James turned to face her. In the darkness, his eyes were shadowed, but his voice was clear and sure. "I'm scared too. I haven't felt this way about anyone since before Emma died. I shut myself down after that, threw myself into work, told myself it was safer not to care too much. And then I saw you clinging to that mast, and something in me woke up. We live in different worlds, James. We live in the same world, I just have more money in it. That's not a small difference." "No," he agreed, "it's not, but it doesn't have to be a barrier, not if we don't let it be." Natalie took a breath. "I need to go home. I need to get back to my real life and see if this still feels real when we're not on a yacht in Mexico." "Okay," James said simply. "Okay, you're right. We should test this in the real world, so go home. Do your work. I'll go back to Los Angeles and do mine, and we'll see each other again. As much as you want, as often as you want. We'll take it slow, we'll figure it out. And the donation, that's separate. That's business. I'm having my foundation team draw up the papers. You'll get that money regardless of what happens between us. I meant what I said. Your work matters." Natalie felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of tension she had not realized she was carrying. James was not pressuring her. He was giving her space, time, the choice to walk away if she needed to. That made her want to stay. "I don't want to walk away," she said quietly. "Then don't." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Natalie leaned into the touch, then rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But James responded by wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made Natalie's knees weak. He tasted like coffee and chocolate, and he kissed like he did everything else, with confidence and focus and intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "That was worth waiting for," he murmured. "We've only known each other for 3 days. Best 3 days of my life." Natalie laughed, surprised by the joy bubbling up in her chest. "You're ridiculous." "You like it." She did. She really did. They stood there for a long time, holding each other under the stars, and Natalie felt something she had not felt in years: hope. She flew home 2 days later. James arranged everything, including a first-class ticket that made Natalie uncomfortable until she reminded herself that this was just how he lived. She needed to get used to it if this was going to work. Her apartment in San Diego felt small and shabby after the yacht, but it was hers. Natalie unpacked the few new things James had insisted on buying her, some clothes and toiletries from the shopping trip they had taken together, and tried to settle back into her routine. It was harder than she expected. Work was waiting, dozens of tasks and decisions that required her attention. But Natalie found herself distracted, checking her phone constantly for messages from James. He texted throughout the day, little updates about his meetings, questions about her projects, photos of things that made him think of her. He called every night, and they talked for hours like teenagers about everything and nothing. 2 weeks after she returned, he came to San Diego. Natalie picked him up at the airport, nervous in a way that made her feel foolish. They had already kissed, already established that this was something real. But seeing him walk through the arrival's gate in jeans and a leather jacket, a duffel bag over his shoulder, made her heart race all over again. He dropped the bag the moment he saw her and crossed the space between them in long strides, pulling her into a kiss that made several people whistle and applaud. "Hi," he said when they came up for air. "Hi yourself," Natalie replied, grinning like an idiot. They went to her apartment, and James looked around with genuine interest, asking about the photos on her walls and the books on her shelves. He did not comment on the size or the dated appliances or the crack in the bathroom tile. He just sat on her second-hand couch and pulled her down beside him, and they talked until the sun set. Over the next few months, they figured out a rhythm. James came to San Diego most weekends, staying in Natalie's tiny apartment despite having a penthouse in downtown that sat empty. He said he preferred being close to her, and she did not argue. She visited Los Angeles twice, staying in the penthouse and feeling like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. James introduced her to his world gradually. Dinners at expensive restaurants where the chefs came to the table to explain the menu. Charity galas where everyone wore designer gowns. Business events where people treated him with a deference that made Natalie uncomfortable. But he also came to her world. He attended her fundraisers, rolled up his sleeves to help paint murals with her kids, sat through board meetings without complaint. The donation he had promised came through, and it transformed everything for Natalie's organization. They expanded into 3 new school districts, hired 2 additional staff members, and created a scholarship program for talented students who wanted to pursue art seriously. Natalie worked harder than ever, driven by gratitude and excitement, and the knowledge that she was making a real difference. But the more time she spent with James, the more she fell in love with him. It was not just his generosity or his wealth, though those things made life easier. It was the way he listened when she talked, really listened, asking follow-up questions days later about things she had mentioned in passing. It was the way he held her hand when they walked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. It was the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met. 6 months after he had pulled her from the ocean, James invited her to spend Christmas with him in Seattle. His father still lived there in the family home where James had grown up, and he wanted Natalie to meet him. She was terrified. Meeting the parent felt like a statement, a declaration that this was serious. But she wanted to meet the man who had raised James, so she said yes. The Anderson family home was a stunning craftsman mansion overlooking the Sound, with enough rooms to house a small village. James's father, Robert Anderson, was in his 70s, with white hair and the same gray eyes as his son. He greeted Natalie warmly, shaking her hand and thanking her for making the trip. Over the next few days, Natalie learned where James had gotten his quiet strength. Robert was kind but reserved, thoughtful in his speech, clearly brilliant. He had retired from running the company a decade ago, but still served on the board. He talked about Emma at dinner one night, his voice steady but his eyes sad. And Natalie understood that grief lived in this house alongside the love. On Christmas Eve, Robert pulled Natalie aside while James was taking a phone call in another room. "I want to thank you," Robert said. "For what?" "For bringing my son back. He was lost after Emma died. He went through the motions, ran the company, took care of things, but he was not really here. And then he met you, and suddenly he was calling me every week, visiting, talking about his life instead of just business. You did that." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "He saved me first." "Maybe you saved each other," Robert suggested gently. That night, after they had returned to the guest room James kept in his childhood home, Natalie lay in his arms and thought about what Robert had said. Maybe they had saved each other. She had been drowning in her own way when James found her, lost in self-doubt and fear. He had thrown her a lifeline, but she had grabbed it, and in grabbing it, in choosing to trust him and trust herself, maybe she had thrown him a lifeline too. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. James's arms tightened around her. "Say that again." "I love you, James Anderson." He rolled them so he was looking down at her, his eyes bright even in the dim light. "I love you too. I've loved you since you told me you panicked while also doing the practical things. I've loved you through every day since. I love you." He kissed her, and it was different from all the kisses before. It was a promise, a commitment, a future being written in the present. The next year passed in a blur of happiness that Natalie sometimes had to pinch herself to believe was real. Her organization continued to grow, reaching more schools and more children. James's company launched a new line of environmentally friendly cargo ships that earned international acclaim. They traveled together when they could, finding beaches and quiet towns where they could just be together without the pressure of their different worlds. They had fights, because all couples did, about time and priorities and how much space to give each other. About money, because James wanted to help with things Natalie wanted to do herself. About the future, because James was ready to take steps Natalie was still nervous about. But they worked through it all, learning to communicate better, to compromise, to choose each other even when it was hard. On the anniversary of the day James had found her, he took Natalie back to Los Cabos. They boarded the Persephone, which he had arranged to have waiting there, and sailed out to the approximate location where her boat had sunk. Natalie stood at the railing, looking down at the water, remembering the fear and desperation. It felt like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. "I want to show you something," James said. He led her to the center of the deck, where a covered shape sat waiting. He pulled off the cloth to reveal a bronze plaque mounted on a wooden stand. The plaque read, "In this place, everything changed, where I found you, where we found each other." Natalie pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. James knelt beside her. "Natalie Torres," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. You are the strongest, most passionate, most incredible person I have ever met. You scare me sometimes with how much I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel lost at sea again. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple band with a blue stone that looked like the ocean. Natalie was crying too hard to speak, so she just nodded. James slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around while the crew applauded from the upper deck. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 6 months later in a ceremony on the beach in San Diego, small and intimate, just family and close friends. Natalie wore a simple white dress and went barefoot in the sand. James wore a suit but lost the jacket and tie halfway through the reception. They danced under string lights while the waves crashed behind them, and Natalie thought about how perfect everything felt. Her father toasted them, his eyes wet with tears, saying he had never seen his daughter so happy. Robert Anderson welcomed Natalie into the family officially, telling her that Emma would have loved her. Natalie's assistant director caught the bouquet and immediately started planning her own wedding. For their honeymoon, James surprised Natalie with a trip to Greece. They spent 2 weeks sailing the Mediterranean, stopping at tiny islands and swimming in water so clear you could see the bottom. They made love on the deck under the stars, talked about their dreams for the future, and planned the life they would build together. When they returned, they made a big decision together. They would split their time between San Diego and Los Angeles, building a life that honored both of their commitments. James arranged for his executive team to handle more of the day-to-day operations so he could work remotely more often. Natalie promoted her assistant director to co-director, giving herself more flexibility to travel when needed. They bought a house together, something between their two cities, a beautiful property overlooking the ocean in Carlsbad. It had enough space for both of them to work, a huge kitchen where they could cook together, and windows that let in the light Natalie loved. A year into their marriage, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a shock. They had talked about children but had agreed to wait a few more years. But when she told James, watching his face transform from surprise to pure joy, she knew this was exactly right. Their daughter was born on a sunny October morning, 8 pounds of fury with dark hair in her father's eyes. They named her Emma, after the sister James had lost, and Robert Anderson cried when he held his granddaughter for the first time. Natalie had never known she could love something as much as she loved that tiny human. James was a devoted father from day one, changing diapers and doing midnight feedings and singing off key lullabies that made Emma giggle. Watching him with their daughter made Natalie fall in love with him all over again. Life was not perfect. Balancing work and parenthood was harder than either of them had expected. There were sleepless nights and difficult conversations and moments of doubt. But through it all, they had each other. They had built something real, something that could weather storms because they had already weathered the biggest one on the day they met. On Emma's first birthday, they threw a party at their house. Friends and family filled the space, and Natalie watched James carry their daughter through the crowd, introducing her to everyone like she was royalty. She caught his eye across the room and he winked at her, that small smile on his face. Later, after everyone had left and Emma was asleep, they sat on their deck watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever think about that day?" James asked, his arm around Natalie's shoulders. "When I found you." "All the time," Natalie admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I was going to die, and then you appeared like some kind of miracle." "You were the miracle," James said. "You held on, you didn't give up, all I did was pull you out of the water. You did a lot more than that. So did you." You could have walked away after Cabo. You could have decided I was too much or too different or too complicated. But you stayed. You gave us a chance." Natalie leaned her head against his shoulder. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," James corrected. "The best decision was firing those flares." She laughed and kissed him, tasting salt air and contentment. Below them, the ocean rolled eternal, the same water that had nearly taken her and had ultimately delivered her to exactly where she was meant to be. 2 years later, their son was born, a calm baby with Natalie's dark hair and a serious expression that made everyone laugh. They named him Robert, after James's father, and the old man declared it the best gift he had ever received. Natalie's nonprofit continued to flourish, now operating in 12 school districts across California and reaching thousands of children every year. James served on the board and regularly volunteered at events, known to the kids as Mr. A, the tall guy who was surprisingly good at finger painting. James's company launched new initiatives in renewable ocean energy, projects he was passionate about and that Natalie supported fully. She attended board meetings when she could, learning to navigate the corporate world that was so different from her own, but that was part of James's life. They took family trips on the Persephone, teaching their children to love the ocean the way they both did. Emma was fearless in the water, diving and swimming like she had been born to it. Robert preferred building sandcastles and collecting shells, methodical and focused like his grandfather. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James surprised Natalie with something she had not expected. He had commissioned a new boat, a 40-foot sailboat designed for family cruising, safe and stable and beautiful. It was named the Natalie Rose, and when he showed it to her at the marina, tears streamed down her face. "I want you to have this," James said. "So you never forget that you're capable of anything. So you can sail whenever you want, wherever you want, and know that you will always come home. To me, to our kids, to the life we built." They took the Natalie Rose out that day, just the two of them while Robert Anderson watched the grandchildren. They sailed down the coast, the wind in their hair and the sun on their faces, and Natalie felt the same freedom she had been searching for all those years ago. But this time, she was not alone. This time, she had a partner who would weather any storm with her, who would always pull her up when she needed it and who trusted her to do the same for him. As they dropped anchor in a quiet cove and watched the sun set over the water, James pulled her close. "Happy anniversary," he said. "Happy anniversary," Natalie replied. "Thank you for never letting me go." "Thank you for holding on," James answered and kissed her as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Their life together stretched out ahead of them, full of challenges and joys and ordinary moments that made up a love story. They would raise their children, grow old together, build businesses and legacies and memories. They would fight and make up and choose each other every single day. And it all began because Natalie Torres had been lost at sea in a small boat, and James Anderson had found her. Because he had climbed down a ladder and grabbed her wrists and pulled her to safety. Because she had fired flares at exactly the right moment. Because the universe had aligned to bring two people together who needed each other desperately, even if they had not known it yet. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, Natalie would tell her daughter the story of how she had met James. About the storm and the sinking boat and the yacht that appeared on the horizon. Emma would listen with wide eyes and then ask the question children always ask. "And then what happened, Mama?" "And then he saved me," Natalie would say, reaching for James's hand across the table. "And I saved him right back, and we lived happily ever after." It was the truth, simple and profound. They had saved each other, and in doing so they had found something neither had been looking for but both had needed, a love that was worth holding on to, no matter what storms might come. The ocean that had nearly taken Natalie's life had instead given her everything. Every time she looked at the water now, she did not see fear or danger. She saw possibility. She saw the horizon that had delivered James to her. She saw the place where everything had changed, and she was grateful. Grateful for the storm that had tested her, for the flares that had caught his eye, for the courage it had taken to climb that ladder and the strength he had shown in pulling her up. Grateful for every moment since, every laugh and tear and ordinary Tuesday evening with her family. This was her happily ever after, and it was better than anything she could have imagined. It was real and messy and beautiful, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine love. It was partnership and passion and the quiet certainty that she would never be lost at sea again. Because James would always find her, and she would always find him. They were each other's true north, guiding each other home through every storm. And that, Natalie thought as she watched her children playing in the yard while James grilled dinner and the ocean sparkled in the distance, was the greatest love story of all. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. Hard-won and deeply cherished and absolutely, completely worth everything it had taken to build. She had set out alone to prove she could trust herself. Instead, she had learned something better. That trusting yourself also means trusting yourself to know when to accept help, when to let someone in, when to hold on with both hands to something precious and never let go. James caught her eye from the grill and smiled, that small private smile that was just for her. She smiled back, her heart full to bursting with love for this man, this life, this beautiful, unexpected second chance. The sailboat had sunk, but Natalie had risen. And in rising, she had found not just survival but joy, not just safety but adventure, not just rescue but love. The end of one story had become the beginning of another, better one. And this story, their story, would continue for years to come, written in laughter and love and the steady certainty that whatever challenges came, they would face them together, forever.